Let's get right to it with our team of correspondents tracking the latest here in the U.S. and overseas. We're going to start things off with NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. So, Vaughn, we know during the election campaign, President Trump repeatedly painted himself as anti-war, vowing to end global conflicts. Now the U.S. has directly bombed Iran for the first time. So tell us why the president ended up getting involved in this conflict and just how it all unfolded.
Right. He had suggested that if he were president during the Biden administration, that Russia would have never invaded Ukraine. He suggested that Hamas wouldn't have attacked Israel. And here this weekend, however, it was the president that made a decision to use offensive tactics to go in and attack Iran at three particular nuclear sites here. This was, you could say, months in the making, or even 8 years in the making. If you go back to 2018, then President Trump pulling the United States out of the Iran nuclear agreement, which was an agreement that allowed for inspectors to go in, but it effectively, that agreement lifted sanctions on Iran. The president and his team were opposed to it, believing that they needed to tighten the strings around Iran. Fast forward to here in 2025, his administration sought to activate nuclear talks again with Iran. They had tried and wanted to force them to agree to not enrich any uranium whatsoever. After more than 2 months of negotiating, Israel a week ago launched initial airstrikes into Iran. And then just days later, here this weekend, the president making the decision to use the U.S. military to go and strike three particular nuclear facilities. The administration, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, describing it as, quote, the final blow, though there's still a damage assessment of those three nuclear sites that is outstanding. So there's still a lot of questions here on this Monday, guys.
Vaughn, we just played a moment ago Vice President J.D. Vance saying the U.S. is not at war with Iran, but rather at war with Iran's nuclear program. We heard a similar thing, actually, from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Then over the weekend, though, President Trump did bring up the possibility of regime change. This was on social media. Are the goalposts changing here?
They very well could be. The president is perhaps inconsistent sometimes in his foreign policy messaging, because it was just yesterday, in the hours after the attack, that you said his administration made it clear, from Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, to Marco Rubio and his own vice president, that this was a precision attack and that they immediately returned U.S. military personnel from Iranian airspace back to the United States after these attacks. And that is where the president, they had said that they came in with one mission and that they were able to fulfill that objective, and that was to take out the nuclear facilities. They did not target the Ayatollah or any other Iranian leadership. But then in a post last night, the president almost contradicting that, writing, quote, "It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change, MEGA?" So those were the latest words of the president. Again, I think that this is where there's going to be much follow-up for this administration to answer about whether they seek to move forward with any other additional attacks after this, despite having previously over the weekend suggesting that if Iran doesn't attack the U.S. in return, that they would not, and that they would stand down.
So, Vaughn, from a national security standpoint, just how concerned is Washington about retaliation from Iran, whether it's proxies hitting U.S. assets or interests in the region, or even worse, a terror attack here in the U.S.?
Right. Administration officials said they were particularly concerned about these first 48 hours after the attack, and the Department of Homeland Security put out a bulletin nationally warning Americans of increased terror prospects here domestically inside of the U.S. If you go back to 2020, the Trump administration, they had fired a strike and assassinated a top Iranian military general. And in response, Iran sent airstrikes to a U.S. military installation and airbase in Iraq that injured more than 100 American servicemen and women. And there was concerns. Iran had threatened that if the U.S. were to use offensive actions against it, like they did this weekend, that they would respond appropriately. And so there's the question of whether that would be a U.S. military installation, assets, but also the threat of potential independent sleeper cells, extremists here within the United States that could seek to attack on the behest of Iran. So we have not seen an attack here at this point in time. but U.S. Officials say that they are watching closely intelligence internationally overseas, but also are aware and heightened of the potential threats here domestically at home.
Vaughn, also over the weekend, we did see these anti-war protests break out across the country, including what you're seeing right now on your screen. That's in Washington. Is the White House concerned about the reaction from voters, including the president's own MAGA base?
Right. There was a lot of pushback, even from some of his strongest supporters, you could say. People like Steve Bannon, people like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who made emphatically the case that the U.S. should not be entering into another war of Middle East intervention. And there is this sort of alliance of skepticism about the potential impact, not knowing how Iran will respond or how this will affect Middle East relations. There was a great pushback to the U.S.'s decision to move forward with these strikes, as Marjorie Taylor Greene suggested that no Americans had been hurt or injured by Iranian military over the years. And so there's a lot of outstanding questions. I asked the president specifically about 20 years ago when he had expressed skepticism about the U.S.'s decision to enter into Iraq. He said this time was different, he said. He said he believed that Iran was potentially weeks or months away from making a nuclear weapon. There's a lot of questions about that intelligence, but this was a striking decision by the president of the United States this weekend. Joe, Savannah.
Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, kicking us off this hour. Thank you.
We have NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter joining us now from London with more international reaction here. Molly, good morning. So we're hearing reports of new attacks this morning from both Israeli and Iranian sources. Tell us first the latest on the fighting between the two sides.
Yeah, Savannah, Joe, good morning. The war is absolutely continuing, even though, as you just heard from Vaughn, so much of the focus now is on what Iran will do in response to the United States. But we are hearing reports, more strikes coming in from Iran into Israel this morning. You see the video on the screen released by the Israeli Defense Ministry in the north central parts of Israel. The Israeli Defense Ministry also says they have targeted the ICRG headquarters in Iran, as well as Evin prison. It's a notorious prison in the capital. The Israeli Air Force also said it neutralized, that's their word, a number of ballistic missile launch sites in Kermanshah, and they've also attacked 6 airports in the western, eastern, and central parts of Iran. They say targeting runways, hangars, and Iranian fighter jets. Guys, also by the numbers, I just think it's important to keep in mind, yes, we are talking about military targets, but also according to Iran's health ministry, 400 people have been killed in Iran, 3,000 injured in the last week and a half. And in Israel, according to the Israeli authorities, Iran strikes have killed at least 24 people.
So, Molly, Iran's foreign minister has now arrived in Moscow to hold talks with Russian leaders. Help us understand what this could mean and just also what we're hearing from Iran and its allies, like Russia and China.
Yeah, he has arrived, excuse me, Joe, and that meeting has happened. We actually, I believe, have some videos, some pictures of that meeting. We have some quotes. It was a Russian TV pool who actually covered that meeting, so everything we are getting is from Russian TV who was actually present. President Putin said an absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran. He's referring to the U.S. Bombs over the weekend. It has no basis and no justification, he said. We have a long-standing, good, reliable relations with Iran. For our part, we are making efforts to assist the Iranian people. The readout we have from the Iranian side is also kind of emphasizes that partnership. He says, the foreign minister, as you noted, we have very close and friendly relations in recent years. Our relations, he says, have become strategic in nature. We constantly consult with our Russian colleagues on all areas and issues of global security. But guys, Russia has a very tough balancing act, right? They have always, and for decades, been very close with Iran. There's no sign at the moment that they are ready to step up kind of their military support or military backing for Iran against the U.S. or against Israel. They also have friendly relationships with Israel. And we know, you guys, we've chronicled President Putin's kind of friendship with the U.S. President Donald Trump. He wants to keep Donald Trump on side, of course, as they continue to fight in Ukraine. So Russia has a very urgent kind of balancing act of big decisions to make, and we'll be keeping a very close eye. But this is definitely the first kind of high-level publicized meeting of the two sides between Russia and Iran that we know of.
Molly, I also want to ask you about these protests we've been seeing against the U.S. bombing in cities around the world. There's concern also about the potential closing of the Strait of Hormuz. That's at the opening of the Persian Gulf, and about 20% of global oil trade passes through this totally critical waterway. How are global leaders reacting to the U.S. taking military action?
Yeah, incredibly critical, Savannah. And actually, I know you asked about China in the last question. I do just want to catch you up. If we're looking at the Strait of Hormuz, China is one of the big losers if Iran does kind of follow through with their threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. They buy about 90% of Iran's oil exports. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry, we have heard a statement. We've gotten a statement today, said the U.S. attack was a, quote, grave violation of the UN Charter. You guys, there was an emergency UN Security Council meeting yesterday where we got a lot of international reaction. But we're also hearing from the UK Prime Minister today. Take a listen to Keir Starmer.
We've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear program and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate. And I've been speaking with international leaders this morning to that end.
As that is the message from European leaders, get the parties back to the negotiating table. We also heard from the French foreign minister on social media. He said France is convinced that a lasting resolution to this issue requires a negotiated solution within the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So you've got about European allies. We know that there was a big meeting in Geneva on Friday with the Iranians, but European allies and leaders are trying to get to avoid kind of any further escalation and trying to get the parties back to a negotiation. Guys.
All right, Molly Hunter, thank you very much.
Let's talk more about the reaction at home and bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin, who is live in Washington. Julie, good morning. So several members of Congress have questioned the legality of President Trump's decision to launch these strikes on Iran on Saturday, including, as Vaughn mentioned moments ago, some members of his own party. What are these detractors saying, and how are Republican leaders responding to the president's move?
Hey, guys, good morning. Well, it's illustrating the divide that we're seeing within the Republican Party, specifically within the MAGA movement nationwide. Of course, you're going to see that reflected in the building behind me. Thomas Massie, a Republican of Kentucky. To be clear, he's crossed the president before on his other agenda items, so there's been a little bit of the back and forth tension already. But he went on the Sunday shows yesterday, partnering with a Democrat to actually introduce a resolution that would kind of try to curb or curtail some of the powers the executive branch has taken back to Congress when it comes to military aggression, starting wars, and what have you in this area. Take a listen to what he said, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I wouldn't call my side of the MAGA base isolationist. We are exhausted. We are tired from all of these wars, and we're non-interventionists. I mean, this was one of the promises. I mean, are you going to call President Trump's campaign an isolationist campaign? What he promised us was we would put America first.
Now, meanwhile, you have most Republicans who are lining up behind the president, including the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who actually posted on X justifying the president and the administration's actions without notification to Congress. He said in a post that Trump, quote, evaluated that the imminent danger outweighed the time it would take for Congress to act. Guys?
Julie, let's talk about the other side of the aisle here. Several Democrats have come out strong against President Trump's decision. It includes Bernie Sanders. During a speech in Oklahoma on Saturday, he called the actions grossly unconstitutional. What else are Democrats saying?
Yeah, most Democrats feel this way, to be clear. And I think part of it has to do with how much they were briefed, what they knew when. There was a little bit of a back and forth over the weekend about this. For example, Speaker Johnson, John Thune were briefed with at least the location, some details before the strike took place. I was told yesterday that Leader Schumer did receive a perfunctory notification, but he wasn't even told where in the world this attack would be taking place. And it was already kind of imminent. You also have Democrats, rank and file members who are extremely angry about the situation, including Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who actually posted on X suggesting the president should be impeached for this, using the I word there. Now, to be clear, we have not seen this echoed by Democratic leadership. This is certainly going to be a point of conversation this week. But when it comes to what the president did, Congress should be notified, should be briefed, and they did so within 48 hours of that military action. At this point, everything seems constitutional, but Congress has a lot of questions they want answered.
So, Julie, at the center of this debate on constitutionality is the War Powers Resolution. We know Democratic Senator Tim Kaine said he plans to force a vote on the Senate resolution he introduced last week. It would require President Trump to get congressional approval before taking any military action against Iran. Congressman Massey, who we just heard from there, he introduced a similar resolution in the House last week. What more can you tell us? And with Republicans controlling the House and Senate, does this even stand a chance in Congress?
Well, it's nothing more than a messaging tool, even if it were to pass, because in the Senate, they could vote on it as soon as this Friday. You could have some Republicans join. Rand Paul, for example, is somebody that I'm watching very closely, and it just takes a simple majority. But still, it is nothing more than a messaging tool, because what this resolution does is reaffirm the War Powers Act of 1973. Massey said yesterday he believes the executive branch misinterpreted it. Again, let's talk about what it does, right? The president does reserve the right to respond to imminent threats. Democrats and one Republican at least are questioning, was this really imminent? They don't have much information. They're going to have briefings that were already pre-scheduled before the U.S. strikes over the weekend, early this week, to get some questions answered. Again, what Republicans would tell you is perhaps the administration has intelligence that they just don't know about.
All right. Julie Zirkin. Julie, thank you so much.
Let's get more analysis now with Brian Katulis. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Brian, thanks for being with us again this morning. So in the space of a few days, we saw President Trump resist calls from Israel to join in on these strikes on Iran, saying he would wait 2 weeks to make a decision, then carrying out the surprise bombing of the country's nuclear sites over the weekend. How do you interpret this shift in the president's stance on getting the U.S. involved in another Middle East conflict?
It's true to form here. He's erratic as ever. He's always on this pathway on foreign policy, but domestic as well. He prides himself in unpredictability. But the key thing I'm thinking about here this morning is, did these attacks actually do the job? We don't know that. We have statements from President Trump that the nuclear material in these sites were obliterated. We actually have evidence to the contrary. And this could be very dangerous right now, that the highly enriched uranium Iran may still have in other sites. So this is a problem with President Trump, is he's not only erratic, he also doesn't tell the truth. And we don't wait for the facts. He has narratives. And I think this is the very thing that we should all be worried about, is the very stated goal of actually eliminating Iran's nuclear program. These attacks may not have achieved that, nor have the Israelis just yet. And that's what we need to actually assess right now.
We've heard from many Western leaders right now who are urging Iran not to respond, instead return to negotiations. Clearly, that's what President Trump is hoping for. From Iran's perspective, how easy will that be, given they were in the middle of negotiations with the U.S. when Israel then launched these attacks on Iran a little more than a week ago? Then on top of that, the U.S. got involved. Has any remaining trust been eroded? Do you think there actually can be negotiations?
I think there can be negotiations, but the key word that you said there was Trump was hoping for negotiations. I actually think they're just hoping. They don't have a plan. I don't think you've noticed, maybe many people have not noticed, but Donald Trump has very few foreign policy successes in the world, especially when it comes to diplomacy. His Russia gambit has actually failed. And I don't see any sign that they're actually serious about diplomacy from the United States perspective. Your question on Iran is, I actually think Iran might look to some other partners in the region, neighbors, countries like Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, where they have ongoing conversations. There could be a pathway there. But back to my point about U.S. diplomacy, I think President Trump, Secretary Rubio, others think that diplomacy simply means putting out a social media post and then saying something provocative on a Sunday talk show. Diplomacy actually involves sitting down with your adversaries and trying to assess, okay, what damage was done, and then has the Iranian position moved? And right now, I don't see the Iranians moving in that direction, but if they see a pathway, it's most likely through their neighbors across the Gulf.
Brian, to your earlier point, how and when will we know how successful this mission was?
We may not know for quite some time, because there's only so much satellite imagery can tell you. You actually need to have eyes on the ground. And there's some very worrisome trends. Again, we're only a day and a half into the U.S. attack. Just some signs that perhaps Iran was already moving some of this material around. And what I'm just saying is that, yes, I'd love to trust my leader, the President of the United States, when he says that the nuclear program was obliterated, but there's some evidence that that may not be the case, and that should worry all of us. What should also worry us is what Iran might do in terms of retaliation. This is a very dangerous state that has actually sponsored terror around the world, including in the United States. So we've taken an action, we've patted ourselves on the back, but the job may not be done.
Brian Katulis, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Turning now to the weather and the start of the week here in New York. And for millions on the East Coast, it is the beginning of a heat wave.
Even at the crack of dawn, it's hot out here. Michelle Grossman's keeping a close eye on this dangerous heat for us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, we're talking about dangerous heat over the next several days. We're going to see temperatures 10, 20 degrees above what is normal for this time of year. And it's warm this time of year. So we're going to watch that at least through Wednesday in many spots and then get a little bit of a break. But right now, we're looking at 148 million Americans under heat alerts. We have heat advisories, heat watches, heat warnings. 75 million of those are under extreme heat warnings, and that's in that pink color there. It's all due to this area of high pressure. It's a heat dome tacked in place, bringing in this heat, but also bringing in humidity. So some spots will feel like 110 as we go throughout today and also tomorrow into Wednesday before we see a little bit of a break. We could see 150 records challenge over the next few days into Wednesday. Where you see these red little dots, those are the cities where we could see some daily record highs falling, and we're going to watch those very closely over the next several days. So we have an extreme heat risk with heat indices of 100 degrees, and yes, some could feel like 110. That's what it feels like to your body. So you want to really make sure you heed all those warnings that we tell you about every year. Hydrate, stay indoors when you can. If you need to be outside, you need to find some shade and spend as little time outside that you can. Look at these temperatures. We're looking at 90s and 100s, 100 degrees. That is the forecasted high today in D.C. The record there is 99, but so many 90s, so many spots near 100 degrees. Burlington, Vermont, New York City, 95 today, 97 in Chicago. Same story as we go throughout tomorrow, 100s in New York City, 101 in D.C. And remember, this is the air temperature. We're going to feel warmer than this. The record in New York City is 96, 90s in Detroit, Dayton, Jackson, Raleigh, 103. That is the forecasted high on Tuesday. Wednesday, we're going to see another hot day, so mid-90s in New York City. But notice we kind of take that downward turn, which is a good thing. On Thursday, 85 in New York City, 79 on Friday. I do want to mention we have warmth. We have a cold front moving through the Central Plains and the Upper Great Lakes, so we could see some severe storms later on today.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.